39715.
Welcome to Bigfoot for Breakfast, home of the mysterious and the macabre, where we sit in the studio every week challenging conventional thought. We are your hosts, Samantha Carter
and Sarah Jones.
We are so very happy to have you back this week and happy to have you listening as well, because that must mean that you find us very interesting. I also find us pretty interesting.
Me too.
And that's what we appreciate about you. So, we appreciate you because you like us. So, we're a little ways into the new year and we've been thinking of lots of ways to make the show better. So, we want to ask you guys for any suggestions that you might have. So, if you have any advice for us, if you have a suggestion for the show, please feel free to shoot us a message on Facebook or email us at bigfootforbreakfast@outlook.com. We always love hearing from you guys, and we also appreciate the feedback that we have already been getting about the show. And we want to ask again that if you have not yet left a rating or a review on whichever podcast app that you're hearing us from, that you please take the time to do so, because that helps the show out tremendously. And it also lets us know what you think. Tell us how you're feeling. Lay back on the couch and talk.
It's never a couch, though. It's more like a chase lounge.
Yeah.
In the movies. Oh, is it a couch in real life, Samantha?
How do you feel about that?
At the therapist's.
How does that make you feel? My therapist purrs at me.
Right.
Saying.
And there's no chase lounge ever in your house.
No, not at all.
They look terribly uncomfortable. I never understood why those would be the thing in a therapist's office. Also, Bigfoot for Breakfast has a phone number now. Well, actually, we've had one since the beginning, but we thought that it would be fun to utilize it. So if you call the number, you can leave us a message telling us what you think of our show. And if there are any messages, we'll put them on the air during the episode. So we're pretty excited about it, and we would love for you to take a second and call in. If you wish to do so, the number is 641-812-2635. And we'll post the number on our Facebook as well. And for all you introverted folks out there, there is no fear of us actually answering the phone because it goes straight to voicemail.
Also, not even just like shout outs or whatever. If you have any input on a subject,
if you have something to say,
tell us.
You just put it on that voicemail.
If you have some weird information about something cool, leave us a voicemail, and we might just hold on to it because we've got a lot of subjects on our list to cover. And if it's relevant to one of our subjects, we'll post it. And if it's not relevant to one of our subjects, we'll post it anyway somewhere.
Even if they're kind of mean within reason, we might still post them.
Yep. With that said, we want to move on to the show for this week, and we are really excited to bring you this one. It was kind of something that we'd come across a while back, but only heard a small portion of the story. We kept thinking that we should read more about it, so when we're brainstorming about what to talk about this week, we looked this over, and we were blown away by the actual full story. Obviously, there is still a lot that we don't know about as civilians, and we hear stories all the time about what the government is up to, but I don't think that I'd ever heard a story quite like this one.
Okay, so before we start the show, I want to take a quick minute to give a shout out to a few other shows that we have been fortunate enough to befriend throughout the last couple of months. Here at Bigfoot for Breakfast, we love these shows, and we want to tell you guys a little bit about what they've got going on. We've talked quite a bit about the Question Everything guys. Their show started up about the same time that ours did, and we've really appreciated all of the support and advice that they have given us. Semper Fi Rob, Sean, and the Mick are your hosts, and these guys are very funny, very relatable, and they talk about everything. Their last episode was on the evolution of weaponry, and you guys can find them just about anywhere. They're doing a lot on Facebook Live too these days, so you can catch them usually on Saturdays. You can find that on YouTube. They also started taking call-ins from guests before they start the actual show on the live. So if you have something that you can contribute to the topic that day, call them. They love to hear from their guests. They ask a lot of questions, and they really want to hear from you. So the call-ins are pretty cool. Give them a listen, subscribe, see what you think. MWP is another one that you should check out. Chris and Josh, they are so funny, and their conversations flow really well. They talk about movies, music, wrestling, politics, and whatever else comes to their minds throughout the course of the show, with lots of great jokes and personality. I think they try to focus on the movies, wrestling, and music and politics subjects as much as they can, but they tend to get off course with some of the other conversation, which is actually great because that's when all the really funny stuff happens. They have a lot of really good points and topics. Please check them out. You really won't regret it. The Kensington Corner with Tom and Jeff. This is a great show, great audio. They tackle the problems of the world one thing at a time, but they focus a lot on health and just overall well-being, both mentally and physically from a man's standpoint. And we have found their show to be really interesting because they aren't afraid to really get into the everyday struggles that guys face, especially with mental health and stress. They talk a lot about different and interesting ways to strip away some of that baggage that we all carry and really focus on self-care and happiness. It's a really honest show, and one of them is a veteran, so they talk a ton about that standpoint and promote various causes associated with the mental health of veterans as well, which we think is incredible because it's a really important topic, and we all know that our nation's veterans don't get the love and support that they truly deserve. So any conversation that can be had about that and how to improve it is fantastic. Last but not least, check out a show called Altered Thought. Sean and Semperfi Rob from the QE guys have kind of branched out, and they actually started another show that's a little bit different. It's less conversational and less debate and more education and facts on some really great subjects. So if you're into just learning a whole lot of new and interesting things, check them out because they do good research on subjects that always keep our interest, and they talk a lot about things that are not discussed every day. They've got episodes out on DMT, the human soul, and they just did one on Mary Magdalene, and they have some really good ones coming up too. So check them out, subscribe to them. So those are our recommendations for you. All of these shows are really good, and the hosts are all friendly, really cool, everyday people who are fun and entertaining to listen to. And if you want to find them all in one centralized location, along with us here at Bigfoot for Breakfast, go onto Facebook and check out the Attitude Podcast Network. Like the page and you'll be updated on new episodes for all these shows, as well as any Facebook contest, live episodes, or whatever else they're up to. With that, back to the show.
This week we take you to the southwest United States, right into northern New Mexico. Here, there is a small town called Dulce and an area not far from Dulce called the Archuleta Mesa. There's a lot of controversy over claimed events that have taken place here by a whole lot of people, where it's said that a number of things, including an otherworldly battle, took place right under the feet of the town's residents. Ooh. Under their feet.
Anyone who delves deep into the alien conspiracies has probably heard or read about rumors of an interconnected underground tunnel system that exists all over the world and the many underground bases. There are said to be bases like this all over the United States especially. Some of the more prominent ones that I've personally heard of are the ones existing at Mount Rainier, California's Death Valley, the Superstition Mountains, and Mount Shasta. But the list really goes on and on. We're here today to focus on one specific area in good old New Mexico.
So it's worth noting that the town of Dulce is also the headquarters for the Ikaria Apache Reservation and has a population of just under 3,000 people. It's located in northern New Mexico, almost to the Colorado border, which, I might add, lies right along the infamous 37th parallel.
For anyone out there who's unfamiliar with the 37th parallel, it is basically a slightly curved invisible line across the entire United States, from the approximate areas of the Chesapeake Bay to Santa Cruz, California. The area extends about 70 miles to the north and 70 miles to the south of the line, and it is typically known as the UFO Highway or the Paranormal Highway, and it's considered to be the line along which most significantly weird things tend to happen, from frequent cattle mutilations to unexplained cryptids.
From what we can understand, there is heavily rumored to be some sort of underground base at the small town, or rather an underground something between the town itself and another area called the Archuleta Mesa. It's been repeatedly claimed that the underground structure is a shared base by both parts of the United States government and one or more alien races. The structure is claimed to be massive, 7 stories to be exact, and includes long stretches of tunnel that connect Area 51 to the Los Alamos National Laboratory. There's tons of speculation regarding the mere existence of this base, but it seems the closer you get to the area and the more you hear from the people who live close by, you will hardly find even one person to tell you that there isn't something incredibly strange under the surface of the earth at the Archuleta Mesa.
Regarding this controversial story are bits and pieces of information all over the place, but putting it together was somewhat difficult because we tried very hard to use as credible of information as we possibly could in a story like this. As you can imagine, there is a lot of information out there that seems to be embellished and unsighted, so we had to weed through a lot to come up with what we have.
Get your garden gloves, we're going weeding.
It took a while.
With that said, there are a few main players here that we'll be talking about, but I think think that the best place to start would be with a man named Paul Bennewitz. Paul had a master's in electrical engineering and was a man who lived just outside of Kirtland Air Force Base in New Mexico, which was a secret weapons system and aircraft research area. The secret ones are the best ones. Paul worked as a private scientist and an electronics specialist who ran a defense company called Thunder Scientific Laboratories. His company did contract work for the military in the 1970s, but it doesn't sound like Paul was otherwise affiliated with the military necessarily. His company designed and manufactured instruments for NASA and the Air Force, and he was often referred to as a genius. Paul lived and worked directly in the vicinity of this base in an area called the Archuleta Mesa in northern New Mexico. And over time, Paul started to notice some strange happenings at the base.
Most prominently, he frequently noted what appeared to be obvious UFO activity over the bases and had photo and video proof of the objects that were consistently coming into the base and leaving the base. Keep in mind too, I didn't put this in here, that where Paul lived was on this is a mountainous area, and where Paul lived was on a big hill overlooking the entire base. So he was kind of positioned nicely to look and see what was going on out there. So he had a good view. That was the thing that bothered Paul the most. It wasn't just as though it was a frequent hotspot for quick flybys by strange aircraft. These very foreign-looking craft seemed to be systematically entering and exiting the bases as if they belonged there. Now remember, we said that Paul was an electronics specialist. Back in the 70s, that basically meant that he was a radio nerd, which is pretty awesome.
A radio nerd with a badass vantage point.
Yep, and a master's and a entire company of really high-tech stuff at his beck and call.
And he was a black belt.
No, that's not true.
That's not true. I just like to make it more exciting.
Let's make Paul as badass as we can.
He was a black belt. He fought Chuck Norris one time. He had built a very sophisticated radio communication system in his home, and this system began to pick up radio emissions and signals coming from the spacecraft and from the base. He spent a lot of time on this, and soon he was able to detect and translate communication signals that were emitting from Kirtland Air Force Base and the nearby places including Manzano Weapons Storage Facility. He came to believe that there was tons of extraterrestrial activity over these areas, and Paul had studied these communications long enough that he was eventually able to translate a percentage of the messages. Not all of it, but usually enough to figure out what they were trying to say to each other.
Thunder Company equipment was also picking up some sort of coded messages as well between extraterrestrial crafts themselves. He had also been video recording various crafts coming in and out of these areas pretty frequently with an 8mm video camera. He had footage of the spacecraft landing and even what appeared to be people walking around the craft with flashlights for a while prior to it taking off again.
Soon, Paul was intercepting radio communications between two of the extraterrestrial craft that seemed to imply that Manzano nuclear weapons storage facility was being monitored for some unknown reason. So he was putting together the fact that he thought he was seeing UFOs in the area and the recent huge spike in missing or abducted people in the area, in which witnesses claimed to have seen UFOs or an abductee survived to tell the tale. Keep in mind, Manzano was a nuclear storage facility, so Paul felt that this was even more pressing.
Indeed, Paul.
Indeed. Paul decided that it would be best to let the government know what he had found.
No, Paul. So
wrong.
He's so sweet.
You're so innocent, Paul.
Honey, no. I feel like I want to pet his face.
Stop doing that with your face.
Don't tell the government you're spying on them.
Don't tell the government things.
Mm-mm.
So he put together a file of evidence that he had collected, calling it Project Beta, and began writing letters and sending this file to every branch of the military that he could think of, as well as the CIA, the FBI, the NSA, and even to President Reagan. Oh, Paul. Honey.
He's very patriotic.
And this, ladies and gentlemen, turned out to be the worst thing he could have ever done.
Of course, Bennewitz was immediately a perceived threat to national security for spying and watching the base, which makes sense because it's not as if all of this activity would have been going on under the noses of the Air Force without their direct knowledge. That's where I kind of don't get Paul, because it's like, well, if these aircraft are going in and out of an Air Force base, they know. They know it.
They know.
It's not like they don't notice on their radars and fancy surveillance equipment. Anyway, my first thought, I think, would have been that they probably already knew what was going on and didn't really like that a civilian was looking into it, especially a civilian as intelligent as Paul Benowitz. They were surprised and alarmed at the actual proof that Benowitz had gathered, and that he had gone to such trouble to collect it, and the sophisticated technology that he had, and these things all put him directly on their radar. Author Nick Redfern stated in a Deep Space episode that Paul Benowitz then became his own worst enemy by indulging all of this information to the Air Force.
So they went about it nicely to start with. In the beginning.
That really struck me funny. I don't know. You really got into storytelling mode right on your face.
Story time.
I took away TikTok from my daughter because it was so annoying. And then I ended up giving it back to her not that long ago. But I made my own TikTok so that I could see what she was doing for sure. And now I'm addicted to TikTok.
My daughter's still not allowed to have TikTok. Story time. My favorite ones are the run.
They're freaking hilarious. Again?
No, I didn't make a goddamn voodoo doll out of your hair. It fell out this way. Can I have your tooth when you're done with it?
We're so good at creepy.
So they were kind of schmoozing him and making him feel as though he was such a big help in the situation in order to do effective damage control. So think about it. He did come forward and had been truthful in showing the Air Force what he had been doing and what evidence that he'd gathered, but they didn't know if he was holding back any further knowledge. You always have to have
an ace in the hole.
Yeah, you have to have a game piece, you know?
You don't give it all up.
No,
right?
Leverage.
Yep.
You have to have a black file that you don't give them.
Just like they do.
Like Project Beta X.
Project Beta mine. All mine.
He didn't really have much else to say. And the fact that they were going to all of this trouble makes it seem pretty obvious that they were hiding a whole lot more. We just don't know what it was for sure. Which is fine. It's fine. This is fine.
This is fine. It's not fine, Paul.
They are the military, and we all know that they have to conceal things from the public due to national security, but things got even weirder.
Every episode we get to do a weirder. So, Benowitz then went to the base at the request of the Air Force, thinking that they wanted his help in figuring out what was going on here. He met with a man named Richard Doty. Yep, remember this guy, who then debriefed him and told Benowitz that the Air Force would provide him a bit of funding for him to continue his home research and report his findings back to the Air Force.
This, my friends, is what we call a payoff. The old bait and switch.
Yep.
And the switch hurts.
It is said that they did this just to keep him busy and also to keep tabs on him so that they could keep track of what he knew. And Benowitz bought right into it.
He was eager to help out his country, and he may have been a bit naive, but he really was no fool. He ain't no fool.
He ain't no fool.
While they mostly seemed welcoming to him, Benowitz did also realize that he was being watched by the Air Force at this point, and he didn't really appreciate the idea of this. But he wanted to continue what he was doing, so he did seem to go into this with a reasonable level of suspicion regarding the people that he was dealing with. The fact that they were keeping such close tabs on him also made him think that he was on the right track. Good thinking, Paul. He also even realized that some of the Air Force personnel didn't really like him or what he was doing. But then, some others seemed to actually be trying to help him, like Richard Doty, the one who debriefed him in the first place and got him research funding.
Richard
Doty.
But Benowitz also realized that not only were the alien aircraft communicating with each other, they were also communicating with the base itself. And this communication is what he had really become interested in. He was normally flying around trying to understand the communication between the alien craft and the humans who were in the underground base. He noticed this type of communication was happening more often at yet another base, the base at Dulce. The majority of his attention then shifted to this area. Benowitz also had photographs from his plane that captured alien craft entering and exiting the area.
At this point, he was being approached by people who were claiming to work within an underground base at Dulce, and he was being told of unspeakable experiments that were being conducted on humans there. Humans were being kept in cages, and from what I can understand, most of these experiments seem to be genetically driven, in which human and alien DNA were being spliced together to make whatever creature that would make.
I don't want to know. And this wasn't just a few people. This was hundreds of people, and mostly these people were victims of kidnappings and were actively missing people.
They kind of let Benowitz do his thing for a while, but eventually the Air Force Special Investigations were told that they needed to go ahead and shut him down and get rid of him. This is where claims start to get weird. So it's said that the military frequently worked closely with a species of alien that we call the Greys.
The way that they described this was there was like 3 different classifications of Greys. Like there's the Greys 1, Greys 2, Greys 3. And the Greys 1 were the ones that they were calling the reptilians. Okay. This is the way...
The Greys, Greens, and Browns?
Grays, greens, and browns. Yeah,
Pretty
basically.
much, yeah.
Well, grays, and then they're broken down into 3 different grays.
Yeah.
There's like short grays. They're a little more docile, but the tall, skinny, reptilian-looking grays are me. And that's who we're talking about.
So apparently we actually had various agreements with these species.
Treaties, yeah.
Okay, so the Air Force employed the Greys to mess with Benowitz to try to scare him into quitting his research altogether. I don't know if they know how people like us work.
It just makes you more interested.
Exactly. Benowitz actually had a small plane that he would fly frequently over the area of Dulce, and remember, he had built these radios that could supposedly intercept radio transmissions and communications between the alien craft, and he could decipher them enough to understand the bulk of it.
Supposedly, the Greys in the military messed with Benowitz so much that he eventually had a nervous breakdown, and this was the end of his part of the story. This really would have been a smart strategy because a complete nervous breakdown would both take him out of the equation and discredit him all at once. Benowitz even lost his business that he had successfully built up himself, Thunder Scientifics. But he had to turn it over to his family because he was unable to function enough to run it day to day.
Obviously, this is a crazy sounding story, and there are some people with some pretty decent arguments regarding how all of these rumors came about, and it doesn't involve aliens in the least. At least not real ones. The argument is that Paul did stumble across something strange in the area and on the 2 bases. Some people argue that Paul happened upon the U.S. military late night testing some of their own more advanced aircraft that had not been introduced to the public yet. Of course these would look strange. They would be completely new technology. I mean, look at how many UFO sightings turned out to be the stealth bombers here more recently.
If Paul had discovered this and had been recording it, the Air Force still wouldn't really want this information out there, after they had just spent probably millions making these new aircraft and they were still in the testing phase at this point. So the rumor is that some of the personnel came up with the idea to kind of give Paul Benowitz exactly what he wanted. They told him that they were alien spacecraft and gave him the job of keeping tabs on them just to keep him busy doing what he was already doing. If they made him feel included and important, he would be less likely to release any sort of information that they didn't want him to. He would feel like he was part of the team. They kept his attention at Dulce as much as they could and away from the classified goings-on at Kirtland Air Force Base. Benowitz slowly immersed himself into this task, driving himself more and more crazy with his own theories to the point that this is what caused his nervous breakdown.
But there were a lot of people who still didn't think that this added up. Since all of these things began coming to light, the townspeople of Dulce began putting a few other odd happenings together and tying them into this story as well. For example, in 1947, a road was built by Dulce right through the desert into seemingly nowhere. The people were told that it would be a road leading up to a major lumber warehouse that would be constructed out there by a large company, but the construction never happened and no lumber was ever hauled onto the road. The road was later destroyed. It was speculated that the military needed a road to get something to the base undetected for a while, and that the lumber company was a made-up story to keep the people disinterested.
In the 1960s, a large classified operation by the military called Operation Gas Buggy took place right outside of Dulce. They brought in huge atomic bombs and buried them about 4,000 feet below the surface of the Earth. The idea was that they would explode the bombs and this would release large amounts of natural gas that was much needed at the time. They detonated the bomb in late 1967, but remained in the area until the late 70s doing their work. Even to this day, digging of any kind in the area is strictly forbidden by the military.
Obviously, there are a lot of people who think that Operation Gas Buggy was nothing but a cover story for the fact that the military was trying to destroy the base that had been taken over by the hostile gray reptilian aliens that they had once tried to ally with. Yes, in the ufology world, the reptilians are classified as hostile and they are not our friend.
Even more than that, from 1975 to 1979, the area surrounding Dulce was hit with incident after incident of cattle mutilation. The reports included often that the organs of the cows had been completely removed with surgical precision, and that the bodies had been drained of blood with no trace of it anywhere. Hundreds of others reported seeing strangely silent and unmarked black helicopters flying around the skies here as well as strange lights moving rapidly around the Archuleta Mesa.
In true Bigfoot for breakfast fashion, we looked a little further into the cattle mutilations by digging around in the FBI-released documents at vault.fbi.gov. And indeed, we found several documents confirming investigations into the mutilations of many, many cattle. Unless this was happening on a very large scale and had some weird characteristics, I can't see that the FBI would have even gotten involved in the killing of a bunch of cows.
I found a report describing a specific incident of this written by a police officer from the New Mexico State Police. The report was written on April 24th, 1978. It's somewhat difficult to read, but as far as I can tell, it reads like this.
On April 24th, 1978, at 7:30 a.m., this writer was contacted by Mr. Manuel Gomez in reference to an 11-month-old Cross-Hereford Charolais bull belonging to him that had apparently been mutilated. Investigation showed that this 11-month-old bull was dropped by some type of aircraft north of Mr. Gomez's ranch house. The rectum and sex organs had been removed with a sharp and precise instrument. The bones had also been removed. The bull sustained visible bruises around the brisket, seeming to indicate that a strap was used to lift and lower the animal to and from the aircraft. The bull appeared to have been dead for about 3 hours. Prints were found 10 feet north of the slain animal. These 4-inch diameter round footprints led to the animal and then away about 100 feet, where it seems that they apparently returned to a hovering aircraft. The imprints appeared to be quite heavy since the ground was dry and hard, and tire tracks from the police car were barely visible. These imprints appeared to have scraped the ground as they moved. Both the liver and the heart were white, and both organs had the consistency of peanut butter. The carcass was dehydrated. The heart was taken to the Los Alamos Medical Laboratory to be analyzed, and the liver was taken to 3 different private laboratories for investigation. The Los Alamos Medical Laboratory returned a finding on the heart. The report is attached. The only entrance to this mutilation site is through Mr. Gomez's front yard. No vehicle was seen or heard entering the pasture. The slain bull was last seen at approximately 8 p.m. on April 23rd, 1978, and appeared healthy at that time.
So that's only one day before. Okay, so if that wasn't strange enough, now we'll read the report from the lab who looked over the organs that were left upon finding the bull.
So, bacteriology, a specimen obtained from a heart chamber was cultured and grown to contain a rod-shaped organism identified as belonging to the Clostridium species. Definitive classification was not made.
The liver was checked against the healthy food market liver, which showed a difference to the mutilated bull's liver. The bull's liver contained no copper and 4 times the amount of phosphorus, zinc, and potassium. No explanation for this condition is available at the present time. Also, the blood which came off the nose when it was presumably dropped was light pink in color. The hide of the animal was brittle and felt to the touch like paper. Flesh underneath the hide was pinkish in color. A probable explanation for pinkish blood is a control-type radiation used to kill the animal. According to radiation experts, the red corpuscles are destroyed, leaving the pale pinkish color. All toxicology findings on the blood are negative because of the dissemination by the radiation. It's believed that this type of radiation is not harmful to humans, although approximately 7 people who visited the mutilation site complained of nausea and headache. However, this writer has had no such symptoms. Now remember, these are official reports that are saying this, so obviously they're suspicious too. It's not just rumor.
The police report goes on to state that the 4-inch circular impressions found at the site were identical to the ones found at the site of another cattle mutilation 13 miles east of Dulce 2 years earlier. The police officer notes that it is his opinion that the animals have been marked for some time before the mutilation occurs, and that of the many cases that they had been investigating, every one of the cattle were native cattle. In the county, approximately 15,000 head of steer had been imported from Arizona, Mexico, Texas, etc., and none of them had been touched. It goes on to write, it is this writer's theory that these animals are picked up by a hovering aircraft, mutilated elsewhere, returned, and dropped from the aircraft. Identical mutilations have been taking place all over the Southwest. It is strange that no eyewitnesses to these incidents have come forward, or that no accidents have occurred. One has to admit that whoever is responsible for the mutilations is well organized, with boundless technology, financing, and secrecy. Ryder is currently getting equipment through the efforts of Dr. Howard Burgess in Albuquerque, New Mexico, to try to detect substances on the cattle which might mark them, and then possibly be seen by infrared rays but not visible to the naked eye. These tests will be done on all of Mr. Gomez's cattle in the near future.
Okay, so that isn't even the end of the report. It goes on and on, really, and there are several more reports here in the FBI vault as well that we recommend you look up. The vault itself is a total rabbit hole. It includes the letter from the New Mexico State Senator Harrison Schmitt, in which he requests assistance from the FBI in the matter. The FBI was able to get involved here because some of the mutilations took place on a nearby Indian reservation, so federal law had been violated, where it really hadn't before, with other mutilations outside of Indian territory. There is an FBI report that had been sent to the director of the FBI at the time talking about the mutilations as well. They had one of the state police officers by the name of Gabe Valdez in direct correspondence with them, and his update that he sent to the director in May of 1978. Valdez reports that the cattle are being shot with some type of paralyzing drug and that the blood is being drawn from the animal after an injection of an anticoagulant. The mutilations seem to be coinciding with the appearances of reports of the unidentified black helicopters being seen in the area. Like the first police officer, Valdez seems to believe that the animals are being taken elsewhere to be mutilated and then dropped back off at their original pasture. He noted that the mutilations are including the removal of the tongue, lymph glands, and sexual organs, and it seems to be done with professional surgical precision. He states that this is not an animal attack. He has repeatedly requested the assistance of Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory and has been put off numerous times while they tell him that it's just the work of predators. Many state leaders and Officer Valdez met up and discussed the holding of a conference in April of 1979 to gather those who have experienced these mutilations and discuss the matter fully.
The conference was held at the Albuquerque Public Library on April 20th of 1979 and was open to the public and attended by law enforcement and media. 180 people showed up. The people were caught up on the case by State Senator Schmitt, and jurisdictional issues were discussed in reference to how to conduct the investigation more efficiently by working together through coordinated efforts between the counties and with the FBI. $44,170 in grant money was received from the government to conduct the investigation, and it was discussed how to use it most efficiently.
Many people spoke at the conference, experts in ufology and cattle farmers alike, but there was one statement that I found to be kind of interesting. Chief Raleigh Tafoya of the Ikaria Apache tribe spoke about the mutilations that have been happening on the reservation, and he made a statement that some of his people who had lost livestock had been threatened, but he didn't elaborate on the threats. Why no one at the conference thought to ask him, I don't know, but I would be interested to know what he meant by this. Threatened by who? I have to admit, I've always wondered about these cattle mutilation claims that have been reported for decades and what they're all about.
What interest would aliens have in our cattle? Why does it only seem to be cattle? And in my research for this episode, I guess I may have my answer. In several sources, I happened to come across the alleged answer to this question. Apparently, the Greys, or the reptilians, as they've come to be called, derive sustenance from the blood and glandular material that they get from cattle. It is consumed by topical application onto their bodies, and then the waste is excreted from their skin as well.
Beyond the FBI vault, there is a letter written to a man named Stephen sent by John Lear in which he talked about the situation at Dulce. We never really find out who Stephen is, FYI. I searched and searched and searched. There was a lot of speculation. Some people thought it was Steven Spielberg. I don't know why, but there is no proof.
Maybe it was Stephen Hawking.
Maybe. I have no idea. Anyway, it was to a guy named Steven. The letter talked about the situation at Dulce, Benoitz, and Project Beta. John Lear is the son of William Lear of Lear Jets. He's known to have worked for the Department of Defense and frequently flew for the CIA on missions. He started hearing things about the Greys and the bases located around the southwest United States, and he became incredibly interested in Dulce, New Mexico. As you can imagine, being who he is, he had some amazing connections, and he began his own in-depth investigation. This letter is basically his outline of everything he had figured out over the years. He talked about the cattle mutilations going on throughout northern New Mexico, and the precision and process by which they're killed, and that all pretty much aligns with the FBI and police reports. He also mentions another thing that totally blew us away. Run.
He writes about a man by the name of Jonathan P. Louette, who was a sergeant in the Air Force. Louette had been at the White Sands Missile Test Range in southern New Mexico in 1956 at approximately 2 a.m. when he disappeared. An Air Force major had also been present and reported that a disc-shaped flying object came and took Sergeant Louette away. Just took him away. Louette was found 3 days later. His genitals had been removed, his rectum had been cored out surgically up to the colon, his eyes were removed, and no blood was found at the scene because somehow there did not seem to be any vascular collapse, so he did not bleed. What? So a human seemed to endure pretty much the same thing that the cattle had been going through, and this was just the first. More reports like this followed. They just weren't as frequent as the cattle mutilation.
He goes on to talk about a known base 2.5 miles northwest of Dulce, New Mexico, buried 1 kilometer deep in Archuleta Mesa. He states that there are pictures of the base and describes tile hallways that go on for miles. People who claim that to have been abducted and taken there are put under hypnosis after their return to society, and they consistently describe insane experiments done on humans within the laboratory there. Photos and hypnosis descriptions portray large vats with pale meat that is being agitated in solution. One of the abductees, while in hypnotic regression, described seeing large test tubes with humans in them. They also stated, "I saw a baby in another." The hypnosis experiments and witness accounts also describe genetic crossbreeding experiments between the Greys and the human subjects.
It's said that the base was built over the course of a few years under the authority of the infamous MJ-12 with the help of extraterrestrial beings. These beings wanted the power of experimentation and control within the human government and the use of humans to study in return for their human use and study of their advanced technology. This was agreed upon, but human authorities here had bargained more for the monitoring of human development and behavioral study, with abductions being on a very small scale, as this is what the Greys had assured them would be happening. The abductions were only supposed to be a couple of hours in which non-invasive experiments were performed, and then the human subjects were returned unharmed, having not remembered a thing. The government and the military also wanted a list of the abductees to be periodically submitted to the National Security Council and MJ-12. It didn't take long to realize the manipulative nature of the beings that they had allied with, as they figured out that people were being abducted by the thousands, including many of the nation's missing children, and that also these experiments and monitoring were going way beyond what was ever agreed upon.
Okay, so let's kind of repeat that. Our government made a deal with aliens, supposedly, in which we would get to use their technology and they would get to abduct us. Only for a couple of hours, though, and we shouldn't remember it. I feel like that's not fair, but that's neither here nor there.
No, at least they wanted us returned alive.
Right. And like they weren't supposed to be performing invasive.
They weren't supposed to be taking our buttholes.
Nah.
Most importantly.
Nah, bro. So there's that. And then things went awry. Imagine that. So these reptilians or Greys turned out to be a little bit more, they're shady, man. They're just doing stuff however they want. They wanted to get in with the government and get into position, but then basically they're just like, we don't care about your treaty.
But then at this point, what are we going to do?
Yeah, exactly. At this point, it's too late. They're stronger than we are.
They out-tech us. They everything.
And this next paragraph proves that. So in 1979, our government got fed up with this, and there was an altercation at the base.
Babe, we need to talk.
Right. MJ-12 had realized their mistake and wanted to free the humans who were trapped in the facility, as the entire plan had gone much further and had become much more sinister than they ever intended. Delta Force was called in to help people get out. The plan backfired, though, because the extraterrestrials involved were an aggressive kind, and they fought back with weapons much more advanced than humans had. In the end, 66 soldiers were killed here. The people who were trapped in the facility never got out.
66 soldiers, Delta Force.
Oh, there was Navy SEALs, too. Later on, a different source says that it was both Delta Force and Navy SEALs.
Why the buttholes? Like, why the rectum and the descending colon?
Apparently they're genetic experiments, and maybe the aliens were confused as to what for sure were the organs for that. Because remember, they don't excrete waste that way. It's through their skin. So they're like, what's this thing? What's this confusing orifice that we don't know what it does? She's staring at me with wide eyes. Go ahead.
So, the rumor mill goes on. MJ-12 was still in operation, and they had spent years worrying about what they were going to do about the aggressive extraterrestrials who solely occupied the massive underground base at the Archuleta Mesa. They figured that the people would eventually find out, because even MJ-12 was really unaware of what the Greys who were still underground in the base had planned. Would they eventually just make themselves known? Would it come out that the U.S. government was involved in the aliens being there? What are they doing down there? They're stealing buttholes.
We all know what they're doing. Mom, I want pizza rolls.
I told you never to come in my room when I'm vacuuming.
They're the teenage son of the MJ-12.
Right?
Doing dirty things.
In dirty places.
Doing the humans dirty.
Yeah, doing us dirty.
Anyway.
The experiments on humans were likely still going on. Oh, you don't say. since that's what they wanted in the first place, and people just kept disappearing. The members of MJ-12 and the parts of the government who were aware of this decided that they probably needed to get the people used to the idea slowly.
So they had completely lost control and are just like, maybe we should somehow, like, tell them but not tell them.
Just the tip.
Yep. Just see how this goes.
Let's just see how they handle it, and then we'll go from there. So, supposedly, they began quietly endorsing films and television shows such as Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Star Trek, and E.T. It could have been Steven Spielberg.
Maybe.
As a sort of soft disclosure project to get the public subconsciously more open to the idea of alien beings. Documentaries were released as well as books about Roswell.
Sometimes love means doing butt stuff.
That's my quote, man.
I know, I stole it from you.
Bastard.
Fair use. Think about it. This is the 70s, and the most humans had ever really been exposed to the idea of aliens were just rumors of abductions that had maybe happened, and some old fiction shows that weren't really even realistic. Look at what happened when War of the Worlds aired on the radio in 1938 and was too realistic. People thought that it was an actual radio broadcast, and they completely freaked out.
People were killing themselves.
Yeah, like it was they were like trying to evacuate the city and all kinds of stuff. They were looting. The government was probably incredibly worried about what would happen when civilians figured out that actual hostile aliens with weapons more advanced than ours were living under their feet.
And we invented butt plugs.
What? It's not true.
It's not true.
False information.
You don't know that?
Show.
Yo.
There's a thing happening.
Something happened. That's my exact quote for when I stabbed a knife through my hand.
Yeah.
Something happened.
We're all like, yeah, I did.
Yeah.
Because, you know, she didn't pull the knife out right away. It was still in there. And it's like, damn, maybe move that.
Mm-mm.
Remember the time when you dropped tongs in the fryer oil and then reached your hand in to retrieve them?
Yes, I remember that very distinctively.
Distinctly.
Yes, it was quite painful and
People-
memorable.
People think I'm the awkward one.
Well, you know, you have those panic moments and you just react without
I would not
thinking.
panic about dropping tongs in fryer oil. Oh no.
Not the tongs! So, in order to execute this soft disclosure, they employed a man by the name of William Moore to help with the spreading of information to the public, including some major disinformation. He had written a book called The Roswell Incident, and the military official who approached him in the matter was none other than Richard Doty.
Richard Doty.
Richard Doty!
Every time. He's always got his nose and stuff. I guess that's his job.
He's got a Doty nose. Remember the beginning of the show when we were talking about Paul Benowitz and his radio equipment? Well, also remember that Richard Doty was the one who intentionally befriended Paul. It seems like Richard Doty was somewhat of a professional fixer when it came to keeping military secrets regarding extraterrestrial involvement.
It seems like Richard Doty approached William Moore probably because he had already published some books on alien conspiracy, and he already had kind of a following, so they'd be able to reach more people with someone like this. Doty gave Moore a call and told him that there was some information regarding UFOs that the government wanted sold to the public, and in exchange, William Moore would be provided later with more truthful information. Moore would also have to observe other ufologists and report what they were doing back to Doty. Moore seems to have agreed to this as long as it was a temporary strategy to keep the people safe, but he would expect that the truth be brought out to the public also eventually. Doty agreed to this. Time went on, and Doty kept stringing Moore along without providing any of the information that he promised to the American people. Moore got mad and ended up coming out to the public himself in 1989 at a convention for MUFON in Las Vegas. He spilled everything. He told people that there was this arrangement with Doty about Dulce, New Mexico, and about the fact that he and Doty had both befriended Benowitz in order to intentionally feed him false information to keep him off the right track. Doty had told Moore that Benowitz made the military officials nervous because he actually had some really high-tech equipment that was picking up things that they didn't want him to, unlike ordinary suspicious civilians.
Moore also stated that when they were told it was time to shut Benowitz down, they worked together to mess with his plane and break into his apartment and rearrange things constantly in order to help along his mental breakdown and make him appear not credible in case he decided to go public with the proof.
Makes me so sad because Benowitz was actually such a smart guy who worked so hard to build up this business, and he was so patriotic that he genuinely just wanted to help out, with something that he thought was an actual problem. So it sucks that they did this to him. Later on, we'll talk about this too, but there was a documentary documentary with Richard Doty where he kind of talks about this. And I have to throw in that if you ever watch this documentary, you just won't like him. The whole time he's talking about it, he almost seems to be like almost laughing.
Smug.
He's smirking through it. And it's like, man, you ruined this guy's life.
Dirty Doty.
His whole life. Dirty Doty. That's a good nickname.
He done us dirty, Doty.
He did us dirty. Okay, anyway. In the meantime, the government would continue to try to develop weaponry that could defeat the Greys and hopefully eradicate them from the tunnel systems that were becoming infested. The Strategic Defense Initiative was started under the guise of creating a defense from Russian nuclear missiles, and it was introduced to the public via a televised appearance by Ronald Reagan on March 23rd in 1983. It was described to the people as a program that would protect them from intercontinental ballistic missiles from different positions in space. From space, the missile trajectory would be able to detect them at various phases of their flight and intercept them using both space and Earth-based laser battle stations.
Laser battle station.
Right? Pew pew. Fire photons. The program was nicknamed Star Wars. Ironic. But Lear brings up that this was obviously not the intended use for the program. They were really developing weaponry of this type to defeat hostile aliens who had already begun inhabiting the Earth.
Lear goes on to list various aliens who are being held at Los Alamos Research Laboratory in New Mexico and various interviews with them. He states that they communicate telepathically and that their only known home is the Zeta Reticuli 1 and 2, which is a binary star system that is about 38 light years away with a spectral class of G2, which is identical to our sun. He speculates in this letter that many people who know about this also know that there are several bases and tunnel systems all over the world. What if they all contain alien beings? And what if a slow plan to infiltrate the Earth from underground is in place? And when they have all gotten into place and the underground infiltration is complete, they plan to move upward, taking our planet as it is easily one that they could inhabit due to our resources and distance and size of our sun. I don't know about you, but to me, this is kind of a dismal thought. Lear goes on to wish his friend Steve a Merry Christmas and hopes that everyone is found in good health. Merry Christmas. We are all going to die.
Right? If you're interested in anything that John Lear has to say about this, take to the internet because there is literally interview after interview with this guy and you can hear all about it.
Definitely worth a Google.
It's worth a Google. You can also find many accounts of claimed abductees who had been taken to Dulce Base and have a story to tell, including a woman named Krista Tilton.
We chose John Lear and the way that he told the story because his descriptions and involvement seem to be the most detailed in writing as far as laying out the actual base and the events that took place in chronological order. But there are a whole lot of other people who tell pretty much the exact same story and witness these things in other capacities.
Yet another man who has come to light in this situation is a guy named Thomas Costello, who is a former Dulce base security officer. There was an interview conducted with him approximately 1 year before his untimely death, in which he talks about installations to the base and the building of the base by the Rand Corporation, with mole machines and nuclear-powered graphite-tipped drill cones. When asked about
that 5 times fast.
Yeah, I know. When asked about where the aircraft are kept, he states that there is an underground hangar southeast of Dulce, one near Durango, Colorado, and one at Taos, New Mexico, but the main fleet is kept under Los Alamos.
He talks a lot about the hierarchy of the different types of aliens that are extraterrestrial, but also mentions a brown species that is native to Earth who consider the human population to be squatters. He tells that they are an ancient race who have always lived deep underground and do not need to come to the surface.
He was asked about where the entrances and exits to these extensive tunnel systems are, and he excitedly yelled, "They're everywhere," and began listing states that had extensive amounts of them. He states that the tunnel systems are huge and intricate and all over the United States. It sounds unbelievable, but honestly, if you do even a quick Google search, you can find incidents of people accidentally discovering tunnel systems all over the place and weird things that have taken place within them. He also states that the reptilians have pretty much taken over all of the cave systems and tunnels since the late 70s, when several altercations, including the one at Dulce, happened with the humans. At this point, almost every treaty that was ever made between them and the government entity has been broken.
Learn your lesson.
There was a good story of a guy who, I think he was in a Mormon, it wasn't a Mormon church, in a building, a Mormon building. And he somehow ended up in a tunnel system and encountered a gray alien. It was in Salt Lake City, Utah. And that was kind of one of the most interesting stories that I found. But there was lots of them where it was just, they weren't really associated with this, but it's like, oh, this person found tunnels.
There's a very extensive interview with Thomas Costello, and I will put it on our list of cited sources so you can read on if you want to. There is a lot that we didn't get into for time purposes here.
Now there's a kind of another edge to this whole thing that is a little weird. Or is it? In 2014, a documentary came out called Mirage Men, and it is about a new kind of men in black. The main interviewees of this documentary are mostly ex-military, who tell a story about how the U.S. government wanted to conceal technology that they were working on, and how they developed a plan to keep the nosy Nancys at bay.
Damn it, Nancy.
They claim that the reported UFO sightings all over the United States are simply new military technologies and testing. The military was getting annoyed at the depths that many civilians and ufologists would go to find out things that the government wanted to remain secret. So they developed a sophisticated hoax program in which they would give people exactly what they wanted. Aliens. That's what I want.
Aliens. At about 2 minutes and 32 seconds into the documentary, who do you think appears at the forefront here as the main character being interviewed? None other than Richard Doty, now claiming to be a professional disinformer and stating that he was trained to lie to the American people. Long retired, he's speaking out now about his position within the government, where his primary job was to confuse the UFO community. He would use his position within the government to gain the trust of credible ufologists with large followings and promise them information. He carefully fed them whatever false information that the government wanted them to have, and they ate it up.
In the documentary, he talks about the situation with Paul Bennewitz and how they manipulated and lied to him, leading him to believe that there were UFOs and aliens at Dulce so that he would be focused on that, and he wouldn't worry about what they were really doing as far as their development of new sophisticated weaponry and planes. Doty states that it was easy to convince Bennewitz to keep things under wraps because he was such a patriotic guy and sincerely wanted to help his country. He states that he began feeding Bennewitz tales about aliens living under the mountains in the Archuleta Mesa. He also states that the videos that Bennewitz had taken of what he thought were UFOs coming in and out of the mountain were actually highly classified projects that were being executed at the base, so the military felt that they had to mislead him. Doty recounts that Paul kept kind of going out on these rogue missions in his plane out on the Archuleta Mesa and was truly stumbling upon classified installments that were supposed to be a secret. So the military would go out in helicopters and dump props in other areas of the mesa so that Paul would find them and focus more on those areas. He claims that the aerial photographs that Paul had taken were actually photos of these props and not landed UFOs.
That's just what they would say.
Right. I get into that too because I'm like,
We said earlier that Paul Bennewitz had endured a mental breakdown. By 1988, he was taken to a psychiatric facility because he had driven himself crazy trying to figure this thing out. He would state that aliens would come into his house at night and inject him with something, and then next thing he knew, he would be driving out into the mountains and wouldn't remember how he got there. It sounds crazy, but as reported by medical staff, there were injection marks on Paul's arms, and no traceable substance was found on his toxicology screen.
So it seems like the argument goes back and forth. There are all these witnesses, all of this testimony, all of these seemingly incredible people, and evidence of alien involvement in earthly matters and abductions, and the government's answer to this is that they created the alien mythology themselves in order to deter people from investigating the secret things that they were really doing. Is this true? Or are they just saying this to confuse the public and further cover up the existence of aliens on Earth and the government's involvement with them, including their mistakes? Who knows? You can all make your own determination here. We'll even put up a poll on the Facebook page to see where you guys stand on the matter. If you're a true Bigfoot for Breakfast listener, I think you know what we think.
That he got roofied by Doty?
Yeah, and there are aliens
True
underground.
Story.
Another man by the name of Phil Schneider, who had worked with the government black projects as a government geologist and civil engineer, decided to come forward to the public in 1990. He mostly gave some speeches about his experiences working in an underground bunker located, under the Archuleta Mesa in New Mexico. His father had been one of the scientists involved in Operation Paperclip, which was basically a U.S. secret intelligence program to bring Nazi scientists to America. Also, he was involved in the Philadelphia experiment and early atomic bomb testing. So growing up with a father like this, he was already aware of shady things that the government had been into, and he had grown an interest in it throughout his life. Phil was part of a team to help continue to build the base and the tunnels, and he says that there was a black budget for this purpose in the 90s that was nearly $1 trillion to build these bases in different areas of the United States. This was in the 90s.
Now, Paul adds a new twist on the government alien involvement here, and he states that over time, he came to realize that the base and the cavern seemed to be shaping up to be bases for a new world government in which these reptilian greys would be involved.
Ugh.
He personally described a facility within the base that was being designed to host UN meetings with a small room just off the larger one from which the reptilians would be observing the meetings, and he got the impression that they would have a lot of control over the goings-on.
Schneider did not like the idea of this, nor do I, but that's neither here nor there. This had been bothering Schneider for years, and he went on the lecture circuit to disclose this incredibly sensitive information to the public as much as he could. He sadly told friends and family that it would likely get him killed. Remember the battle that we said was supposed to have taken place in the base between soldiers and aliens? Bill Schneider describes the same battle, and even tells a story in which he is accidentally a part of it.
He states that they were mining in this area, and they were trying to basically figure out where and how they wanted to build, and they ended up in an old existing cavern system that they didn't even know was there. They could hear commotion and gunfire and rounded a corner to see reptilian gray aliens engaged in a battle with what appeared to be Delta forces and Navy SEALs, which was extremely confusing. And it would be.
I mean, that would be a sight.
At some point, Schneider was hit with what he described as a plasma weapon, which took off part of his right hand before he was quickly extracted from the area. In 1996, Phil was found dead, strangled to death. He got Epsteined. No autopsy was conducted, and it was ruled a suicide.
Murder by suicide? Soon after all of this came about, Schneider on the lecture circuit telling all about the things that he knew, and then his murder, books, documentaries, and articles began coming out that completely discredited Schneider as a total lunatic and liar. The people close to Schneider and the other people who claim to know the truth state that this is all part of a government agenda to make him look like an idiot to the people, so that all of the things that he said would just be brushed off and the government could go about their business, which is notoriously what the government does. They discredit you and make you sound like some outlandish crazy person so that people will just be like, oh, we're not going to worry about anything that they say. So who do you believe? The scientists who worked for the government and saw what they saw, or the media who claim that he made it all up?
Hashtag I stand with Schneider.
Right. And everybody else. There are aliens under the ground.
So, it looks like that's what we've got for you this week, and we appreciate you listening. This was a crazy episode to cover, and it was about this close to being a two-parter, but we managed to squeeze the main idea into one, so that was good. But I still think we could expand.
Oh, we're going to go on with
Let's
this.
go on into the tunnel systems with accidental encounters. Don't forget the contest that we have going on right now. All you have to do is mention us on Twitter or retweet or whatever it is you tweeters do, and you'll be entered into a drawing to win a free Bigfoot for Breakfast t-shirt in your size or a black glittered Bigfoot for Breakfast tumbler. We're going to hold the drawing on January 31st on Facebook Live in true awkward Bigfoot for Breakfast fashion, and we will draw 2 lucky winners this month, so please don't forget to enter. It truly helps us out a whole bunch, and we really appreciate it. Plus, you might get free stuff, and who doesn't love that? For all our new listeners, don't forget to push the subscribe button on your podcast listening app so you can be notified of new episodes every Tuesday. And if you want to leave Bigfoot for Breakfast an audio message, or leave us some feedback, or make a show suggestion, or to just say hello, call 641-812-2635 and we'll air it on the show. Until next week, Bigfoot for Breakfast, out.
Please leave us a message.